Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. We're really excited to have you all with us on this lovely Tuesday morning. We're excited with the theme today: curb the COVID disengagement slump. How to boost audience engagement and attendance throughout the festive season and beyond, I would imagine. We are super excited to have with us influencer and just general marketing guru, Becky Updike. We have to make a sincere apology that we have spelt Becky's last name incorrectly. It should be D-Y-K-E at the end there. So apologies, sincere apologies. If you want to reach out to Becky, please make sure that you have the correct naming there. So without further ado, we've got a couple of things that we'd like to run through in terms of the agenda. The first thing that we're going to do is just have a brief introduction, learn a little bit more about Becky and the background there at Tiger Brands. And then we will move on to discussion time, and then we're going to have a Q&A session. So this webinar will take approximately 1 hour. We will have a Q&A at the end for about 15 minutes. And so what we'd love to do, guys, is we want to make sure that this is a really engaging a webinar. This is not us just talking to ourselves. This is us wanting to make a good chat with you and keep it really engaging. And so I encourage you all now to seek out on your screen the Q&A tab, I would call it, and if you could just please let us know that you can hear us simply by clicking on that tab that says Q&A and say yes, you can hear and that you are very much present, just so that we know that you're there. And you can also ask us questions throughout this discussion today. We would much rather you ask us questions than just sit there and do your emails, for example. So please get involved. Feel free to ask us anything that that really comes to mind throughout. If it's something very pressing and interesting, we will likely ask that question during the conversation. But if it's something that's a trend or an interesting point at the end, we will certainly ask that at the end of the conversation. So thank you. I can see people saying they can hear us, which is great. Great to know. So thank you for letting us know that, team. And we are onwards with the show. So to start with, I think it's a really interesting discussion that we're going to have. And I want to just take a moment to say, Becky, tell us a bit about yourself. Give us all of the insights into your role at the moment and some details around into Tiger Brands and what the current climate looks like for you at the moment.
Hi, Heidi. Thank you guys so much for having me today. Let me just confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect. Thank you, Heidi. So hello, everybody who's on today's call. My name is Becky Updike, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Tiger Brands. I realize that most of you may not be in Africa, so maybe have not heard of Tiger Brands, and probably not of myself either. So let me start by introducing myself, and then I'll move on to the company for which I currently work. So you may understand and hear me as American, as I am. I have been in Africa, though, for about 8 years, working at different consumer products companies, and more recently for the past 2 years as the Chief Marketing Officer of Tiger Brands. I moved originally to Africa as part of General Mills, so I've worked in food products for many decades, and then spent some time with the AB InBev SAB side in the beer world as well. So have done lots and lots of eventing in that side, as well as continued that here under Tiger Brands. So who is Tiger Brands? Tiger Brands is a multi-billion-dollar company here in Africa, based out of Johannesburg, and we are the largest Africa-based consumer products company on the continent. We have a majority portfolio that is food products, between 80 and 90%, with some very heritage brands here, as well as some personal care and home care brands as well. Tiger Brands turns 100 years old this year, and so we're in the process right now of making sure that Tiger Brands is also going to be set up for success for the next 100 years as well. So that's a little bit about myself as well as about Tiger. So feel free, of course, to ask any questions as we move through on both topics, myself as well as Tiger.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So thank you so much. I think in terms of the next slide, what we're looking at really is learning a little bit more about how COVID-19 has impacted your role as CMO. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about, what's changed. How have you pivoted your strategy? How did it all look? How did you navigate this current situation?
Okay, so thanks for that question, and it actually was a really interesting question to dissect because I think there are two aspects to the impact of COVID on my role. The first aspect was my role as a leader within a large corporation. We have 15,000 employees, and the health and safety of our employees and the operations of our business certainly became a key priority, first and foremost, as a member of the executive team that manages the business as a whole. So putting on that leadership hat and that business hat for more than maybe we normally have to in a chief marketing officer role. So really sitting through and understanding and leading decision-making in spaces that may be not reflective normally of a chief marketing officer role. And so in this case, it's making sure that we're looking at the health and safety of our employees, ensuring that our product is getting to market, especially during lockdowns that happened here in South Africa, and ensuring the overall operations of the business as a whole is able to continue to perform. And so the priority of what I needed to be able to shift to meant that I had to put on my total business hat more as an executive of a large publicly listed operation than one might not normally have to do as a chief marketing officer. Second, obviously, is the marketing side. And if the world is changing around us, clearly we need to inspire and change what we're talking about with consumers. And so really having to step up our agility and influence my marketing teams across the business to be thinking about what do consumers want to hear now and what are they going to want to hear in the near future, and maybe having to adjust things to having a little bit more of a short-term view than a long-term view as a result of what's happening right now with COVID. I think the aspect of having to bring more agility into our marketing has been something of a big surprise. You might say fast-moving consumer goods as an industry, but we all know that typically it's the sales that are pretty fast, but the actions within a company not so fast in this industry. And so it's been a real wake-up call in that space. Thanks, Heidi.
Right, yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much of an impact for us both as leaders and when we have to look at our own marketing strategies and pivot the messaging and, really think about how do we make sure that we are on top of that emergency response, working with the response teams, etc. And that communication piece internally and externally is so fundamental to navigating it all, really. I'd be interested in terms of, as marketers, audience engagement is really key. How do you actually keep connected with your audience during these humbling times, Becky?
Okay, so again, I think a twofold answer on this question. And the first thing about connection is about understanding. And it's really taking advantage of the different types of tools that we have within our business and within our marketing toolkits to see what's happening and to understand how consumers are feeling right now and how they're acting as well. So social listening is a tool that we have been using across our different platforms to understand what are the key trends that consumers are talking about and acting on. So early in the pandemic, for example, baking across the world, including in Africa, became quite a trendy topic and an activity for everyone to do. But what are they baking and what are they talking about? And then consequently, am I serving them the content of things like banana bread, because we have a flour brand, to ensure that we're actually getting what we need out there that is relevant to consumers. Other types of connection in terms of understanding what's going on is listening in on these types of conversations, and also the different webinars and reports that were being issued by a lot of our research partners, whether that's Kantar, Nielsen, IRI, et cetera, in order to stay close to what actually people are saying in different surveys and in their actions as well of what they're buying in the shops. And in that regard, really taking all of that types of information and then using it to stay connected with our consumer, feeding them the content that they're looking for, changing the tone of what we're talking about, and really staying connected in terms of the tone as well. At the beginning of the pandemic, what people really wanted to hear about is very different than what people want to talk about today. And if we're serving content at the wrong time that's talking about the wrong thing, it will just create disengagement.
Yeah, I'm so interesting to see how things have changed in terms of when we have been listening to our customers. I mean, from an Uber perspective, from a marketing Uber for business, what we had happen to us was our buyer totally pivoted. So historically, we were talking to people who were like travel managers and trying to engage with them. And for us, suddenly we launched Eats for Business because nobody was traveling, and suddenly we had to talk to completely different people. So it's interesting to see how strategy has had to evolve during this time too, as well as buying habits, as you've mentioned. I think it would be interesting as a follow-on from that to understand perhaps, what might be your top tips in order to boost engagement whilst maybe avoiding overstimulation and disconnection overall.
So first of all, in order to boost audience engagement, the number one thing to do is to buy your media correctly. And there's a lot of different factors against which you can buy media, especially in the digital space. And are you buying for reach or buying for engagement? And it's very easy to buy against the wrong audience. And so first of all, from a media perspective, if you want engagement, buy against engagement so that you're able to target more effectively those that are looking for it. Secondly, it's have good content and really ensuring that you're delivering good content against which people are interested in hearing. So I mentioned the recipe content before. And actually one of the things that we did was actually go back into our archives and pull out a whole bunch of recipes that we've actually used in the past 5 to 10 years across our social platforms and reinvigorated them and brought them to life because they suddenly had a whole new level of engagement. In addition to that, I would also say that it's understanding the relevance of the different brands during the different periods of this pandemic as well. So another great example is that we have a breakfast cereal, hot cereal brand called Morvite that has the goodness of sorghum as well as is fortified to the extent that we can make an immunity claim. And so it's bringing back to life some things and messaging that maybe that wasn't what we were targeting at doing this time of the year or even this year as a brand, but it's really brought to the fore products that can be relevant during a pandemic as well. And then the final comment, and I think this is what we're going to lead to in this conversation as well, is about being a little bit more experimental with how we're engaging with our audiences as well. I'm here talking about digital and social media type platforms, but really experimenting as well in other new spaces, such as having Zoom cooking classes with our audiences, doing more live feeds, as well as having digital and remote events that we've been able to engage with as well. So, learning and experimenting was a big piece of understanding what we could do to boost audience engagement. Thanks, Heidi.
That's really interesting. So you've diversified the type of content that you're looking at to kind of move digitally more so than just historically. So Zoom cooking classes sounds great, and presumably you're promoting that across social channels to your active followers. How do you reach? I'm just wondering now. How do you reach new followers that way too, or are you kind of more talking to your existing customers?
In this case, it's a bit of both. And the Zoom cooking classes, for example, in experimenting with a platform like that, it was also saying, how do we create some of the exclusivity that you might get from a live event, but still be able to do it digitally. So it's about saying who wants to be a part of this, potentially having some competitions, and then only accepting a limited number so that you're still able to have an engagement and not just have a one-way conversation. And so in that case, those times we only selected a certain number of individuals. They felt special for being selected, and you still got to have a bit more of that special type of engagement that you might get in a real live event.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because from an Uber for Business perspective, we saw the same type of pivot, right? So we had to move everything online. All of these big events closed down. We couldn't be at exhibitions any longer. Everything's moved to webinars and like online summits. And so when we were looking at how do we increase boosting audience engagement, how do we engage with our customers more effectively, what we've seen is, so we have a product called Uber vouchers, and gift cards. And what we've seen in Africa specifically is that more people are investing in these gift cards to say, hey, join this webinar and get a free coffee on us kind of thing as a marketer. Or, you know, thank you for, guess if you're the winner of this competition on social, you get an Uber gift card. And that's been interesting for us to have to use ourselves, right? So we've tested this as well and to see if audience engagement is higher, if people get this kind of a gift card. So I can see the repurposing and movement online. We're certainly doing more webinars now. But I'm wondering, so in terms of, we have here the COVID messaging fatigue, I'm wondering, did you feel as though you had to shift to more engaging, slightly different messaging with your content as well? Or how have you felt about that piece?
So there absolutely, I think there's been quite a shift, and at the very beginning of the COVID epidemic, as it really hit globally and hit here in South Africa from an impact perspective and lockdowns, the messaging was very much, you know, first and foremost about we're in it together and let's celebrate those heroes that are at the head of the battle against COVID. I think the fatigue maybe started to build in, you know, maybe 4 to 5 months later, a bit after we've also seen quite a bit of unrest in the world in terms of social issues coming to the fore, like Black Lives Matter, and permutations across Africa as well with government issues. You know, a sensitivity of the world is not as we've always thought it was going to be, and maybe we need to start challenging that. And so if people are thinking about that, it's also important to make sure that we're not ignoring and engaging instead in some of these more difficult conversations. And then here in South Africa, the bigger concern that consumers have had has to do more with the economy than actual COVID because of the impact of these lockdowns. But even prior to that, in the quarter prior to COVID coming, South Africa had dipped into a recession. And the economic impact of a country where you have a lot of people sitting in the middle and you lose your jobs and you fall right to the bottom. And so the economic impact of what's happened in the past 9 months here is potentially very tragic. And that is the fact that consumers are more concerned right now when we do our consumer research studies with the economy and money in their pocket than they are with COVID. Now, arguably, we're in a dip right now, unlike Europe and the States, and we have very few cases in the country at the moment. So the economy is very much top of mind. And consequently, that means that we've also adjusted a bit of our communication to really helping people in terms of value and finding good deals, how to make more to do with your leftovers, and making your products stretch further as well. So we've also had to have quite a bit of a shift in the last several months to really helping people stretch the money in their wallets further as well. Thanks.
I think that's a really interesting point that you've raised, and we've had a number of people asking questions on the content piece, and I think as you know, I think we've got a little bit of time to dive into that now. So thank you for your questions. One of the questions is, I love the message of content coming through, but many stakeholders in the C-suite think of just competitions when we talk about content. What would your thoughts be, Becky, on how to motivate more authentic content as a marketing approach? And I suppose the point is, we're doing a lot of these content related to get this, answer this question and get something. Have you thought about any kind of user-generated content, or how are you thinking about authentic content?
I think that's a really powerful question, and we can see it, and I can see it every day flowing down my own social media streams. The easiest thing to do right now is to give away cash. Do this, win that. Or just to give away simple anything else. Here in Africa, airtime is the other one. Cash or airtime, win cash or airtime. And instead it becomes a battle on who's just giving the most away. And getting engagement through competitions, it certainly has a role to play in gaining more connections for you as a brand. But in the long term, it doesn't necessarily create a healthy environment for you to be building your brand and also building the premium that you might be asking for your brand. And I'm constantly challenging my teams to find the interesting hook in the competitions that they run. What makes it uniquely about your brand? And yeah, maybe you can still give away some cash too, but is there not something that you can also give away? For example, I look back at a competition I did when I was in the beer industry, and we gave away a completely remodeled classic car here in South Africa, a completely unique prize, not the typical.
Wow.
And you can really increase the conversation, and you can increase the engagement that you get because you're asking people to talk about the car, to help you design the car, etc., instead of the simple do this, win a car. And so there's a lot to be said for competitions. As I said, they can bring a lot to you from an engagement perspective, but in some ways it is just a shortcut. In terms of gaining from consumers and what are we looking for from a consumer content perspective, and can they participate, I think it's to our detriment to not ask them to participate. In particular, we have the beauty of working in food, and people love to take pictures of their food. They love to make food videos of their own. And if we're not inviting them to engage with us on those platforms, then we're just missing out on really high-quality content that does exist in that space. And most of what we're posting on Instagram at the moment, especially in the stories-type feeds, Instagram, Facebook, et cetera, are going to be consumer content that they're creating and simply tagging us. But it's so beautiful that we need to take advantage of it and use it, and it really does keep our consumers engaged and coming back to our social platforms as well.
That's a nice kind of link to the next question, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. So, and it comes down to kind of this exploit or explore channels. In current climate, investment ROI is so important. It's also very tough to track sometimes. Do we think that now might be a good time for us to either double down on the platforms we know work? Maybe that's for Facebook, or maybe it's on, Instagram for your brands. Or is it also a good opportunity to look at new avenues like TikTok, for example? And how do you think about, the kind of exploit, explore, double down, try new, when you're looking, especially in current landscape? I don't know if you have a perspective on that specifically.
So I have a perspective that you go where your audience is. And if during the pandemic our audience is shifting or spending more time on certain platforms, we must follow them. Otherwise, we'll lose them. And so, for example, we have seen obviously a great increase in gaming. And so, being on the gaming platforms like Twitch, just as you've mentioned, like TikTok and the time spent there. But it comes down to are those your consumers? And consequently, if the answer is yes, then you should be there. It's not experimental anymore if there's millions of people engaging on these platforms. In which case, at least from an eyeballs and reach perspective, you will get them. Obviously, a lot to learn, and that can be learned about these new types of platforms, but really that comes down to working both directly with those media platforms to know what types of content work for them, and also with your media partners, if you have a media agency, et cetera, who should also be able to bring the insights on what to do and what not to do. The biggest complaint that I have with my teams is often just the replication of the same work across multiple platforms, and it isn't customized appropriately to take advantage of the platforms nor the audiences and what they want to see on those types of platforms as well.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so perhaps now we could look into some positive changes. What positive changes might COVID have brought for the future? Have you seen any shifts in things like strategies as a result of COVID?
Sure. So let's first say positive changes have you seen post-COVID? We're in the midst of it, aren't we? I do think that many people here in South Africa do think that we're post-COVID, but let's be honest. I think Europe has taught us all a lesson on this in terms of second waves of COVID. And I mentioned this at the very beginning of what I spoke about. I do think that COVID has made a lot of marketing leaders into stronger business leaders. There's no point in marketing your product if you don't have any stock of your product. Is your packaging stuck in Italy, and is your product stuck on a boat somewhere from China, for example? And really having to dig down and really understand our full supply chains and making sure that we're not putting out messages that can't be delivered in an actual purchase, for example. And so I do think has been a very good experience for many people to have to open their eyes beyond a small piece of their business. The second thing is agility and the ability to react. And seeing that as an absolute critical, because of consumers' mindsets have probably never had to change as quickly as they have in the past 9 months. And consumers react very differently to emergencies, and marketers do as well. And those that are successful right now are those marketers who have been able to shift course, change their plans, work with agencies to adjust things so that they're still getting the full value out of what marketing spend they may have or have left at this point. And those that haven't been able to adjust have probably ended up losing money, paying for things that they aren't actually going to get value for, and potentially not having products on the shelf. Thanks.
Yeah, I think so. I think from an Uber perspective, just thinking about it as well, like I mentioned, we had to really quickly launch 3 new products. So we launched Uber Eats for business, we launched Uber vouchers and Uber gift cards. But what that brought was, for us from a business perspective, is we didn't know any of our audiences. So suddenly we had to understand better, okay, the positive change. We've basically, I don't know if it's done anything, if COVID has impacted anything differently. I think what it's done is it just brought everything forward quickly. So perhaps our go-to-market strategy for some of our new products, like Uber gift cards, that was in 6 months' time. Or well, now we've just launched it. So we had to kind of really, like to your point, really increase that internal speed of, okay, who are the new buyers? Why are there so many marketing people suddenly looking at buying vouchers for their client gifts, right? What do they care about? Why are there so many HR people wanting to feed their teams at home or give, their Christmas party, have Uber, I don't know, drinks, or, so everyone's virtual, everyone has to, so we had to look at our funnels a little bit differently. And I think what that's done is it's cut out a lot of the longer term processes that are very good for us to take a look into and work through, but then make it more streamlined, make it quicker, to your point of speed internally, and get to where the buyers are a bit more in an agile manner. And I think that it's been an interesting test and learn phase for marketing. Testing new platforms. I think we have seen our new buyers in places that our old buyers weren't. And so, it's interesting to now have this multi-channel, multi-audience balance that we've developed. And I think that certainly will impact going forward how we think about launching our go-to-market and looking into how do we really reach those buyers in different places. Okay, so moving on to the next question, and I think that was a little bit more in terms of the longer term effects for marketing and events. And I'm not sure to what extent you guys are doing events. I know that you had done in the past and what that looks like. have you thought about what the longer term effects might be for you in marketing?
So specifically in the eventing space, we have dabbled back in to the eventing space due to the level of lockdown that we're now in, which is called level 1 in South Africa, where you can actually have events up to 500 people here at the moment. And so we have dabbled back in from some of our brand launches and communication type events being in person as well, but with really strict protocols in place. And I think that one of the key things from a long-term perspective from the eventing space will definitely be more risk planning and analysis as well. So what happens if you have to cancel your event because things change, and are you prepared to move yourself online very quickly so you don't lose out on the benefits? I think the other thing that our eyes have been open to is really being able to do events that are more multi-channel as well. So how can you have events where there are some people who are there in person, but not exclude those that aren't? And I think the world has often been a lot more, it's either a streamed event or it's an in-person event. And how do we make sure that it's more multidisciplinary moving forward? And I think we see that even in our lives from a meeting perspective. You know, meetings today, yes, some are in person, but most are now, on Microsoft Teams or other platforms. But how do we have both at the same time? And I think that's what we're going to see here as well. You know, it's been a great benefit for me internally as a marketer. I have marketers who are in some of our other countries, and I've moved some of our in-person training that we were doing every month into being more virtual, and we realized that this is so much better. I'm not going to do this in training in person for all my marketers anymore. We're going to do it virtually from now on because more people are able to actually participate. And so I think that what we'll see is events being looked at in many different ways, and that the purely in-person event may not be the events of the future.
Right. Yeah, I think what we're looking at in Uber as well is actually, rather than seeing the webinar or the online event as kind of secondary to the physical version. And of course, there's always going to be a place for meeting people face to face. And I think what we did before with our event strategy is we had very kind of high touch events with small numbers of people and dinners and this sort of thing. And then we went to the larger scale, events where we'd have maybe 1,000 people present or 500 people present, where it was more thought leadership. And then also the kind of business breakfasts where you do this sort of thing, this kind of webinar physically in Africa. We would have people come to the offices and things like that. But what I think we're looking at is kind of shifting online for sure as the scale. We're seeing that the fact that, the benefit longer term that we're identifying is that people are actually happy to engage in webinars regardless as to whether they are, in Ghana, in South Africa, you could be in Cape Town or Joburg, or, there's lots of different people joining from lots of different places, which of course you can't do physically. The proof will really be in the pudding as to how effective we're able to translate these sorts of events into online. I mean, I think we've all heard some good and bad or seen and witnessed some good and bad examples of online events. I think, and you raised a very interesting point about the hybrid nature. Like I've seen recently, events where people are talking over each other, or the deck isn't quite right, or the tuning in is not right. So there are some challenges with online for sure. And I think that what we're going to need to do as marketers and as kind of educators and as I guess early adopters of moving a lot of things online, especially events, is perfect what it's like to do an online event, get it right. Maybe there are tools that need to be developed. For example, what do you think? I think there needs to be some development there in terms of making it more successful.
I completely agree with you, and I think we've all been experimenting across a number of different types of online platforms and conferencing software and other software as well, where we've had some hits and we've had some real misses as well. The the key thing that we know on our end is that the in-person element is never going to go away. You know, we are in a food business, and you can't eat food yet over the internet. And consequently, that means that in-person nature of how we do things and how we event is still going to remain incredibly important. We've tried to do a bit of hybrid of how do you can we send in an Uber a box with everything in it to someone's house and then they engage. And we've done a bit of that, and that also does work. But that real factor of food, and food becomes memory when you eat it with other people. And so when you eat a meal by yourself, it's not very memorable. And when you eat a meal with others, you do remember it and the food that you eat. And so we know that in person is going to be important to us. And so it's also how do we move forward in a way that makes it really safe? And how do we do events safely, assuming that we don't get a vaccine here in the next week or two? We're going to have to think about how do we do this in person, and also how do we sample our products effectively moving forward as well in a cost efficient way, if we aren't going to be handing out samples down a supermarket aisle as well, because that's also in-person eventing to some extent.
Yeah, it's an experience, isn't it? I mean, there is a lot of chatter that we've had. I mean, you're talking to food, and what we've, and you mentioned getting the Uber package to the person, and I think there's an opportunity there to do some kind of an interesting stunt or something where we have to understand, so one of the interesting pieces we've noticed with Uber Eats, the business, is that we are seeing teams eating together on Zoom, which is an unusual thing, right? So you're getting your delivery as a team and you're suddenly eating. Now, it sort of brings into a new perspective of watching colleagues. If you're going to look at them, it's not quite as, it's much more engaging online in the sense that you can't very well not look at somebody passively, I suppose. So I think there's an interesting touch point on how do you take this, especially the food piece that you talk about, and move that onto an online experience that doesn't A, look bad, or B, keeps people engaged without it with kind of a passive way, I suppose. But okay, interesting. I think we're sort of coming to the end now. We have another question that just popped in. Let's see. Actually, let's keep going to the next slide, and then maybe we can have another chat about what's going on. So in terms of, yes, this is the Uber piece. So welcome to the Uber for Business slide. Thank you for holding out for that long. If you would like to learn a bit more about how this, what we're doing a lot is, I've mentioned, we have these vouchers. As marketers, you can, of course, buy vouchers and give them as gifts or gift cards to your colleagues at the end of the year for the holiday parties, or it might be organising a team event like a kick-off or a sales kick-off or an internal webinar that you want to give a little coffee or something to boost attendance for your webinars and events yourself. Give it a try if you fancy that. We'd be delighted to share how these things work, and you can see here some examples of how it might be a benefit to your business. If you'd like to know more about that, we'd be delighted, so do let us know. Now's the question. Yeah, of course, here we are. Are you interested in learning more about Uber for Business? If you are, we'd love to give you a call and have a little chat with you about what we can do. And please, the same piece for Becky. If you have any questions relating to Tiger Brands, if you want to sample some of the delicious food that she's been talking about, maybe online, maybe using an Uber, please do reach out. I'm sure that we'd be happy to answer any questions around that as well. So we have reached our Q&A section a little bit earlier. So let's see, what does the audience want to talk about today? All right, so let's have a look here. Does your newly adapted marketing strategy focus on keeping up with the day-to-day changes of the audience, or more on longer-term customer engagement? Becky, I don't know whether you have a view on how do you think about your marketing strategy focusing currently on the day-to-day versus, keeping a longer-term level of customer engagement. I suppose what we're talking about here is the here and now, dealing with what's in front of us, versus the longer-term strategy that you might have had in place, and how you're balancing that.
Thanks for the question. It's actually a very interesting question and a key one for all marketers to be thinking about. And I have a personal marketing philosophy followed by many that, if you aren't talking, someone's going to forget about you. And so there's your long-term big picture messaging that you might have, but there's also more of that blinking that you need to do to maintain a significant reach level that's often done through more tactical executions. And in that space is more of where a lot of that conversation, I think, is happening from a COVID perspective, a banana bread perspective, if we put it that way. And it's that adjustment of more of the tactical work that we've been looking at. And so, the bigger pieces of work in the larger communication that you may have in the brand purpose type of space, or your big ads and big pieces of content, that type of work, at least for Tiger, has become actually incredibly more important for us during this time period, and that's because of that economic recession that I've mentioned. We make premium brands in a country that's going through an economic recession. So we need to make sure that our products stay worth it for consumers to purchase within the food space. And so really ensuring that we're continuing to create long-term pieces of content that really drive more purposeful and emotional communication as well. So as much as we may be playing right now with a lot of our tactical work, there is absolutely still a focus on ensuring that we maintain that long-term relationship with our consumers as well.
Awesome. And please do let us know if you have any other questions to ask our fabulous influencer this morning. And we've got a bit of a personal question, I suppose, really here. How do you prioritize your mental health during COVID? Do you have any tidbits? Are you suddenly taking up yoga in the morning, Becky, or is there anything else that you'd like to add about your mental health, or how you're thinking about that, perhaps, as well as your team?
So let's start with the work side, and then I'll move to the more personal side. On the work side, I think it's this whole thing has really made us as leaders have to be much more conscious, I think, of the mental health of those that work with us, and making sure that everybody is okay. We have employees who live by themselves that may be quite lonely. We have others who have family members who have lost their jobs, and still more that are overwhelmed by working in a home that's full of kids and others, and that it's actually really hard for them to work. And so as a leader, you have to, and I've had to become a lot more engaged in the personal lives to some extent of those that work for me, to make sure that we're setting them up to still be successful during this time. And really starting every meeting that I'm having with those that work with me with a question of, tell me how you're doing, and guiding it in a direction that moves beyond simply how the work is going, but into how are you really doing. And it's unlocked, I think, some opportunities for us to help and to use the programs that we have through Tiger to help people from a mental health perspective, as well as to help them and their family members access any other type of support that might need over this time. On a personal side, obviously, as an American, I have most of my family overseas, and you've had to really set up and keep going from a communication perspective when you don't know when you're going to see your family again. And how do you create engagement over platforms like this that you may not have had to before? I have a 4-year-old child that has decided that talking on the video conference with her grandparents is no longer very much fun. So we've had to turn it into ice cream dates because, ice cream works. Ice cream works. But those are the small little tools and tactics that we have to use to keep our families connected and sane as well. And yes, exercise as well, making sure that we're getting out and seeing the sunshine, making sure that we're taking the moments that we have to breathe at home and to make sure that our partners and families are all okay as well. We're all, to some extent, we can use that messaging that was very much at the beginning of COVID to say that we're all in it together, and we all are still. And taking that time to check on people and to listen is probably the most important thing that we can all do, and hope that we all personally get listened to as well.
Thank you for sharing that. I have failed to learn yoga, or rather a headstand specifically. That's one thing I'm still going on personally. But I think that that was really interesting insight. And I think as leaders, we do have a responsibility to check in, as you say, make sure that our teams are okay during this time because it's tough. Back to kind of more marketing customer related question. How often do you revisit your customer journey map? Do you do that regularly? And do you have a kind of strategy around that? Do you sort of plot it out in a certain way? Or how do you think about customer journey mapping?
I think we've had to think about it a heck of a lot more consciously in the past 9 months to understand whether the journeys have changed and or not. And whether those changes that happened in the first couple of months in terms for us of people's shopper and shopping journey and move to e-commerce, you know, how much is it going to stick and how much of it is a temporary change? And these are the types of things where before we were maybe only relooking those maps once a year as a piece of our more annual brand planning process, have our consumers changed, have their behaviors changed, but now it's changing every month. And that's that aspect that I had mentioned before about really keeping up to date and using the marketing partners that you have in your business to help you to do so. And sure, being able to do it yourself is one thing, but there's a lot of other people looking at the same thing. And so making sure that you're stretching your funds as far as possible by looking at what's out there as well. One of the key tools that we have is panels that we keep internally. We use Facebook Messenger personally. And so we're able to do ad hoc interventions just to check on things, to ask specific questions, and get some pulse type surveys on so that we're understanding if things have shifted for real or have shifted for a time, and thus do the reaction that we need to as a result.
Mm. And what is in your MarTech stack? So have you got tools that you go to that you're like, these are, I mean, you said Facebook Messenger is like a tool internally that you engage with. Do you know, Google Analytics might be something that you leverage from a website perspective. I'm just wondering, do you have any tools to share with this audience that you think are good for your MarTech stack?
Sure. So, I mean, I mentioned this one before, but for us, our social listening tools have been really critical over this time period. From the aspect of making sure that we're creating content that people are really interested in, that we've had some celebrity scandals and things like that over this time period, some of whom have been, you know, brand ambassadors before for us for the business. So really keeping an eye on things, especially in this time of you know, social sensitivity across the world. And I say that only because it varies by country. And really understanding what those impacts are so that we're not so that we're ahead of the game and not chasing the game. And so we had really only invested significantly in social listening about a year ago, and it has really paid off in this past year in terms of how we've been able to both proactively and reactively use that as one of our key tools to optimizing how we're talking to consumers.
Mm. Okay, and if you look back on this last 9 months, do you have any advice, if we're doing it all again, right? So we're sitting back in March or February, and you've got this all in front of you, but you don't know what's going to happen. And now with hindsight, what would you do differently, or what would you tell yourself to do differently if there was anything? I mean, marketing related, obviously, during this time. Is there anything that you would double down on or get to faster, or any advice that you would have given yourself?
Oof, what a good question. I haven't actually sat down and thought about that. So
yeah.
I think, you know, I feel like we're still in the midst of things. So it's quite a challenging question.
Yeah, I mean, while you think, perhaps I could answer the question myself. So,
yeah, go for it.
I also pondered. So I think that I suppose that it's been a shake-up, right, for marketers, because things changed, and our customers, you know, the customer journey mapping piece, of course, is really fundamental. And I think that what I would give my advice to myself would probably be to be more aware of, where the customer is and where the future customer might be. So instead of just relying on what's current and, maybe looking at what's coming down the line a little bit more effectively, to prepare for other eventualities. And I think, what happened is we had to be very speedy in responding and moving our marketing strategy, whereas I think with a little bit more time invested in research and understanding other potential buyers would have been useful up front. And I think it was a great test and learn opportunity to try new messaging to new people and quickly pivot. And I think I would have gotten to that test and learn quickly as well. And also I think that, when you're looking at segmenting your base or segmenting your buyer, it is an opportunity as well to say, okay, well, look, this is happening. Is there a new buyer, like you said, and is there some other opportunities in new places or in new selling points? So, the gift card launch probably would have thought about reaching out to marketers a little bit more quickly about that, because everyone was eating at home and everyone needed to boost the morale of their team and keep their team happy. And I think that there was an opportunity there for sure. Oh, and the other thing was everyone was suddenly moving their home office. So we could have been talking a little bit more actively to our buyer, saying, if you've got to move everything, use an Uber. We learned that people weren't naturally coming to Uber as an opportunity, as a conclusion, and that we had to be better at walking people to the opportunity to use Uber to move their office space home, but get food to their people, their critical workers when they were getting to and from. Suddenly commute was an option, and people like multi-choice in Africa were using Uber to get their networks, their presenters to the right places and their warehouse staff to the right places. And I think we could have been quicker and more agile about telling that story to that buyer. Has that given you some time to think about what you think?
Yes, it certainly has. And I think I'll answer this question with the second hat that I wear in our business, which is that I have the R&D function, research and development, who does our product design and new recipes, et cetera, report to me as well. And the piece that it really awoke us to, that I would have really approached much more quickly, is understanding the product origins and design of our products more intimately, and how much that needed to have been done in the past in order to understand, where do your ingredients come from? How do they get here? Where in the world may they come from, or are they made locally? And understanding and having backups and business continuity type of planning for things that maybe didn't think needed to have them before. So a good example is that we had one type of product that we produced that the packaging was coming from Italy. And Italy was one of the first countries that was impacted by COVID in Europe, and we had a disruption to our supply chain. But it was a real surprise to all of us. We didn't really know, because we hadn't been that intimately involved, that the packaging was coming from Italy. And so these are the types of things that I think were if I look back, I think it teaches us as marketers to really understand more about what it is that we're marketing and selling, so that we can make sure that we're going to have that product to market and sell in the time of emergencies or pandemics, hopefully never again. But that doesn't mean there won't be other business disruptions in the future.
Excellent. Well, I think that was a good note to end on, Becky. So I want to say, with 6 minutes to go, a huge thank you for your insights and for your great education this morning. I think we've all learned a lot. I've really enjoyed speaking to you, and I think that I could probably ask you a lot of questions on a personal level as well. But thank you so much for sharing all of these insights today, and thank you for everyone who's joining. We're looking to run webinars to generate some thought leadership for the marketing audience regularly, to help better understand what's going on in the market and better connect the dots for everybody. So thank you again for this morning, Becky. It was a pleasure, and thanks everyone else.
Thank you so much, Heidi and team, for having me. I really appreciate it. And if anybody else has any questions or wants to connect, feel free to find me on LinkedIn. Thanks.